October 14, 1943, morning over Schweinfurt, Germany. At 25,000 feet, the air is thin and glassy, the world below like a gray map smeared with smoke and war. Feldwebel Lucas Brandt adjusts the trim of his Messerschmitt Bf 109G6 as he banks into position over Bavaria. His breath fogs inside the sealed cockpit. Fuel, good, guns, loaded, targets, inbound. His orders are clear. Intercept the American bombers before they reach the ball-bearing plants. He's flown 32 sorties in the past year. He's seen B-24s. He's seen the occasional B-17 straggler limping home, engine smoking, tail torn open. But nothing has prepared him for this. He sees the formation first as a distant glint like sunlight dancing on water, but the glint doesn't scatter. It grows, thickens, sharpens. And then it comes. A black wall crawling across the sky, rising higher than he expected, slower than fighters but relentless, steady. They are not individual planes, they are a single organism. And they are bristling with guns. Brandt squints through his canopy. The intelligence reports had mentioned it in passing, that the B-17 Flying Fortress carried heavy armament, defensive, nothing serious. But this is something else. He counts slowly. 1 gun in the nose, 2 above the cockpit, 2 below, waist gunners, tail guns, twin mounts, every quadrant covered. It hits him like cold water. Each fortress isn't armed like a bomber. Each is armed like a destroyer. 13.50 caliber machine guns per aircraft. And there are over 200 in the formation. More than 2,600 heavy machine guns now crawling into his airspace. The first gunfire doesn't come from the fighters. It comes from the fortresses. Brandt flinches as a stream of red tracers streak past his canopy. Not a warning shot, a coordinated barrage from a plane too far out to even see clearly with the naked eye. His wingman shouts over the radio, "They're shooting already, at this distance." Brandt pulls up, trying to find an angle, but every path toward the formation is filled with fire. They're not defensive. They're hunting. Below, the 8th Air Force's 1st Bomb Division holds tight in a box formation. Every fortress overlaps its fire with the next. Gunner arcs are rehearsed, mathematical, mechanical. Every direction, every approach, covered. Inside one of the lead bombers, Staff Sergeant Jack Blaine locks his sights on a speck diving from above. His twin .50s chatter. Shell casings fly. His turret vibrates like a thundercloud. The radio is calm, clinical. Tail section, bogey 6 o'clock low. Waist gun right, target on vector 270. Top turret, cover port quadrant. This is not chaos. This is orchestration. Each fortress is a fortress. But together, they are an airborne citadel. Brandt rolls into a steep dive, trying to get beneath the formation where the belly is weakest. He feels his stomach lurch as he slices through cloud cover, engine screaming. And then he hears it, the sound that German pilots have come to fear. Not the shriek of flak, not the scream of sirens. It's the pulse of twin .50s firing in rhythm. He pulls his stick hard left as bullets rake across the nose of his 109. Metal screams. His right aileron snaps. He's leaking fluid. Still he climbs. He wants to see it. He has to see it up close. He bursts through the edge of the formation and catches a full view of a B-17's belly turret rotating to face him. Just a glimpse, but it's enough. The gunner inside is just a silhouette, a man encased in armor and glass, but the twin barrels of the .50s snap toward Brandt like they've been waiting for him. Fire, muzzle flash. His cockpit lights up red. He jerks back out of the formation trailing smoke, the right wingtip shuddering. His wingman is gone, vapor. Radio chatter is screaming now. They're covered from every angle. I can't get close. I'm hit. One voice desperate. Who the hell puts 13 guns on a bomber? Inside the fortress, Sergeant Blaine doesn't even blink. He reloads, checks bearings, the crew says nothing. They just do their jobs. Their world is bullets, steel, and sky. The tail gunner calls out, 2 bogeys down, 1 coming around again. The pilot replies without turning, let 'em come, we'll paint the sky with lead. Back above, Brant struggles to level out. His 109 is flying wounded, controls sticky. He looks down and sees the bomb bay doors open. And still, the fortresses don't break formation. They drop their payload like it's a drill. Precision, steel rain falling on Schweinfurt. Factories burn. Rail lines melt. The machine that fuels the German war engine crumples under the weight of American industry, delivered by men who fly inside bunkers that shoot back harder than most fighters. Brant turns toward home, his teeth clenched, his fuselage bucking with every gust. He doesn't feel like a hunter anymore. He feels like prey. The sky is no longer German territory. Not when death can come from every window, every hatch, every angle of a bomber that isn't just surviving, but fighting like it was born to. And there are hundreds of them. At 25,000 feet, the fortresses bank toward the west, climbing back into the clouds, empty of bombs, but still full of teeth. And behind them, Bavaria burns. The fog of war didn't lift over Schweinfurt. It settled. Thick, chemical, and choking, it rolled through the valley like a judgment. Fires burned with no color left in them, only heat, black smoke, and the slow collapse of twisted girders. In the control tower at Luftwaffe Base Leifheim, Hauptmann Otto Richter watched the smoke trails vanish into the western sky. The bombers were gone. Again. Not a single one had fallen within view of the airfield. The anti-aircraft batteries had fired until barrels glowed. The fighter groups had launched in force. And still, the fortresses made it through. They always did. Behind Richter, the room was silent. Radar operators hunched over their consoles. Radio officers sat with hands frozen near switches. No one dared speak the final tally out loud. 70 more fighters lost. Another city burning. And not a single fortress recovered. He turned from the window, eyes hard. Tell Goering, he muttered, his Luftwaffe no longer owns the sky. Over Belgium, Staff Sergeant Jack Blaine sat in his gunner's chair with his hands still shaking. His goggles were smeared with sweat and oil. The twin barrels of his turret smoked faintly, cooling slowly after a 30-minute barrage. He didn't remember most of it, just flashes, shapes cutting through the sky, the white arcs of tracer rounds slicing the air, the blur of enemy wings spinning past. And the bodies. One of their fortresses had dropped out of formation over Bonn. A German fighter had taken off the tail with a 20 cannon burst. The crew never bilayed. The plane folded midair and vanished in a streak of fire. Blaine's intercom had gone silent for a full minute afterward. No one said a word. Then someone finally spoke, dry and hollow. God help him. Now flying home over friendlier skies, Blaine adjusted his harness. Every muscle ached, but he kept his eyes on the clouds. Even now, he wasn't sure the fortresses were out of reach. Captain Eugen Voss flew home alone. His Bf-110 limped toward the horizon, right engine trailing smoke, canopy cracked from a near miss. His rear gunner was dead, his uniform soaked in blood. Voss didn't bother with the radio. The channels were filled with screams, static, and broken formations. Half the squadron was missing. No one was coordinating. He'd broken through the box once, just once. He dived straight down from the sun, lined up his shot, and unleashed every cannon and MG he had into the flank of a fortress. He saw the wing tear, smoke billow. But before he could confirm the kill, 3 waist guns, a top turret, and a tail gun all opened fire. He never saw the gunners. He only saw the air in front of his cockpit turned solid with tracer rounds. He rolled out, barely avoiding a direct hit to the canopy. Behind him, the fortress was still flying, still firing, as if shrugging him off like a fly. Back at base, Voss staggered down from the wing and collapsed onto the tarmac. He couldn't hear, couldn't see clearly, but he felt the blood trickling from his ears, the metallic taste in his throat. Someone helped him up, another officer. They said something about medical, about debriefing. He only muttered one thing, over and over. "There's no way in, no way in." Over the English Channel, the fortresses reassembled into tighter columns. Damaged aircraft were pulled into the middle of the formation. Smoke trailed behind some engines. Flak scars peppered the fuselages, but they were alive. In the cockpit of Hell's Warden, Captain Alan Rawls gripped the yoke tight. He'd lost his top turret gunner. Waist was hit. Bombardier wounded, but they'd made it. "Gunner status," he called. The radio crackled. "Tail S out, mid's good, left waist firing." He nodded. "Ammo." "Down to a third." He looked out across the gray expanse. The other fortresses held steady. Most weren't talking. No one celebrated. They just stayed quiet, kept flying. Inside the hold, the spare belts of .50 caliber ammunition sat stacked along the fuselage walls. Crates of brass, each round gleaming like coins stamped from death. They had started the mission with over 230,000 rounds distributed across the formation. Now only a fraction remained. But they had delivered the payload, and they had come home. That was what mattered. In Berlin, Generaloberst Hans Jeskinek stared down at the reports stacked across his desk. B-17 formations increasing in size. New tight combat box, tactics proving impervious to standard fighter interception. High loss rates among 109s and 110s. Depleted squadrons. And the numbers, always the numbers. 13.50 caliber machine guns per aircraft. Effective ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Velocity of 2,900 feet per second. Each gun could deliver 500-600 rounds per minute. That meant each B-17, in theory, could hurl nearly 7,000 rounds per minute into the sky. Multiplied across a squadron. An airborne storm. It was not a bomber. It was a fortress. That night Voss sat alone at the airfield bar, uniform unbuttoned, eyes red from smoke and wind. Another pilot approached, younger, fresh from training. "I heard they carry machine guns everywhere, even the belly." Voss didn't look up, he simply nodded. "They have guns in places no sane man would expect," he said. "They cover the front, the tail, the top, the sides, underneath. Even the blind spots aren't blind. You can't sneak up on them, you can't dogfight them, and God help you if you try to face one head-on." The young pilot hesitated. "So what do we do?" Voss drained the last of his drink. "You pray they run out of bullets before you run out of friends." In the morning, a new wave was forming over East Anglia. Another squadron of B-17s loading up. Ground crews rolling crates into the bomb bays. The nose art still fresh from the day before. Sergeant Blaine stood by his turret, looking up at the sky, same as always. He'd fired over 2,000 rounds yesterday. He would do it again today. No one cheered, no one grandstood. They simply loaded the belts, checked the barrels, and waited for the order to climb. They weren't just fighting to bomb factories. They were rewriting the rules of war. 1.50 cal at a time. The engines shook the ground before the wheels even turned. 4 Wright R-1820 Cyclone radial engines per aircraft, 1,200 horsepower each, spun up on the frozen airfield at Bassingbourn, England. The sun hadn't risen yet. It never did this far north in October without a fight. 36 B-17s sat in a row, their wings coated in dew, their bellies heavy with bombs. Ground crews hurried between them, checking hydraulics, topping ammunition cans, tightening bolts that would be asked to hold through hell. Inside the belly of one fortress, Virginia Rose, gunner William "Buck" Mallory loaded his turret. The twin .50s clicked into place. Belts of brass hung like muscle tendons from racks behind him. He didn't speak, didn't need to. This was his 7th mission. He had seen what happened when a fortress broke formation, when one gun jammed, when a gunner hesitated. Hesitation got men killed. Steel, oil, and fire kept them alive. In the cockpit above, Captain David Holloway ran through the checklist with co-pilot Jansen. Both men had already lost friends in other crews. A Fortress 2 hangars over Lady Ruth had been vaporized 2 weeks earlier over Regensburg. No chutes, no survivors, just red vapor in blue sky. But Holloway didn't think about that now. He stared out across the field, watching other birds spin up, props screaming, exhaust washing the tarmac in waves of white. It was another day, another raid, another 8 hours in a steel cage punching across Europe with only .50s and altitude between him and death. At 6:35, the bombers lifted off one by one, carving black scars into the morning. By 700, they were over the channel, climbing. At 900, the coast of Belgium broke beneath them like teeth. And at 9:27, the Luftwaffe came. Gunner Buck Mallory didn't see the 109s at first. He heard them. A faint whine on the wind, high-pitched, like an engine too far away to matter. But it grew louder. It always did. Then the flak started, black blossoms of shrapnel curling through the air around the formation. "Here we go," Mallory muttered, spinning the belly turret. His knees pressed against cold steel. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck. Over the intercom. "Bandits coming in high, 11 o'clock. Waist gunners, eyes on the left flank. Keep formation tight, don't drift." It was like a choir warming up before a symphony. Everyone knew their part. Everyone was already singing. In his Bf-109, Feldwebel Dieter Mahler swept in from above, diving with the sun behind him. He'd flown over France, North Africa, Russia, but this was different. These weren't bombers, these were monsters. He picked his target, a fortress on the edge of the box, slightly lower than the rest, and dropped in fast, cannon charged. But even before he closed, he saw the glint, the flash of spinning turrets, the flares of muzzle bursts. Every direction spat fire. He dove anyway, fired. Shells slammed into the wing root. The fortress shuddered but didn't break. Then the air lit up around him. Waist gunners, nose gunners, belly gunners. He pulled hard right, but not fast enough. The tail gunner caught him, 3 rounds through the canopy. Mahler never saw the ground. Inside Virginia Rose, Mallory's guns bucked against their mounts. His fingers pulsed from the recoil, but he didn't stop. A 109 screamed across his arc. He followed, squeezed, watched it spark and peel away trailing smoke. Another followed, diving too fast. Mallory opened fire again. Missed, reacquired, fired again. The tail gunner's voice cut through the noise. 2 more down. God, they just keep coming. The pilot didn't respond. Holloway's hands were tight on the controls. His eyes were locked forward. They were over Koblenz now. The city below was already burning from the first wave, but they weren't done. This was just the midpoint. On the ground, anti-aircraft guns fired wildly. Shells burst around the formation, but the box held. 13 guns per plane. That's what the Germans had finally come to understand. They had assumed bomber meant soft, meant slow, meant blind. But the fortresses didn't flinch, didn't dodge. They flew into flak like it wasn't there. They fought their way to the target, and then they fought their way out. In the rear turret, Staff Sergeant Daniels spat blood onto his lap. Shrapnel had ripped through the fuselage and peppered his left arm, but he kept firing. A 110 came around again. He hit its center line and watched it tumble. Daniels didn't even register the kill. He just looked at the red soaking through his sleeve and reloaded. When a gun jammed in the starboard waist, Private Gutierrez cleared it with a screwdriver and the flat of his palm, gritting his teeth as his ears rang from the barrage outside. Every man inside the fortress bled for every round fired. But the fortresses kept fighting. On the edge of the city, Major Heinrich Schramm of the Luftwaffe peered through binoculars from a flak command post. The sky was on fire. He had seen dozens of raids, London, Warsaw, Kiev, but this. The fortresses didn't break. They weren't just a threat. They were a strategy, a doctrine. What made them terrifying wasn't what they dropped. It was what they carried. 13.50 cals, 13 arcs of fire. 1,000 gunner eyes staring back at you. He lowered the binoculars slowly. No one should be able to build something like that, he said quietly. The bombs dropped at 10:41. Steel screamed through the air and smashed into rail yards, chemical plants and warehouses. It was the second wave that day. Another would come tomorrow. And the day after. Germany was learning the same lesson, over and over again. You can shoot at a fortress, but it shoots back. In the radio room of Virginia Rose, Sergeant Harlan Murphy tuned the set for home, static, then command, then the code word, Crimson. They had done it, target hit, mission complete, turn west, regroup. But they still had to get home. That was the unwritten truth about fortress crews. The real war began after the bombs fell. That's when the Luftwaffe got desperate. That's when they came fast and angry and reckless. That's when the tail guns heated to white, and blood sprayed across metal, and gunners screamed over the intercom with half their chests missing. That's when the .50 cals weren't weapons anymore. They were lifelines. As the fortress turned for home, one engine trailing smoke, Waist Gunner Gutierrez opened fire again. He didn't look at the rounds as they flew. Didn't watch the German fighter explode. Didn't count the seconds. He just fired. Because firing meant flying. And flying meant home. In the weeks that followed the second Schweinfurt raid, the briefings inside Luftflotte 3 headquarters took on a different tone. Not panic. Not yet. But something colder. The maps still had lines drawn across Europe. Arrows marked altitudes. Flak batteries were moved. Fighter squadrons were retasked. But the men giving the orders no longer spoke like masters of the air. They spoke like defenders of a city already on fire. General Hugo Sparrow circled a black and white photo on the table. It showed a B-17 tail, riddled with cannon holes, with the name Iron Maiden still legible in bullet-pocked paint. The tail was all that had been recovered. 13 machine guns, he said, and the crew used every one of them. This tail was from a fortress that kept flying another 20 kilometers before it finally fell. He tapped the paper. This is what we're up against. Not pilots, not planes, but a machine of war so redundant in firepower it can lose half its strength and still kill you before it dies. Across the table his officers were silent. Some scribbled notes, others just stared. They all understood now. Fighter losses were not an accident. They were inevitable. At the Jagdschwader 3 airfield near Rhein, pilots no longer joked about easy meat bombers. They didn't brag about kills. They watched the fortresses pass with binoculars, estimating altitude, formation width, arc of fire. They timed their dives down to the second, But the problem wasn't accuracy, it was survival. Hauptmann Victor Janssen had made 3 passes on a formation over Dusseldorf. He'd come in from above, low sun to his back, throttle wide open. Fired a full burst of 20 into the nose of the lead bomber, just as they'd trained. And still he'd taken hits from 3 directions: waist gun, top turret, even the tail gunner of a trailing aircraft. His left wing caught fire. He punched out just before the fuselage folded. Now he stood in the infirmary, shoulder in a sling, listening as another pilot asked what went wrong. Janssen didn't answer at first. He just looked at the floor. Then slowly, "I hit one. I saw the engine explode, but it didn't fall. They kept flying. They kept shooting. It's not a bomber, it's a fortress." In London, at the American 8th Air Force Operations Center, the reports were being tallied by typists who could no longer keep up. Each mission came back with stories. Gunners firing 3,000 rounds and going deaf from the concussions. Fortresses returning with holes large enough to walk through and still managing to land. Crewmen climbing out with burns, shrapnel wounds, frozen feet smiling, still alive. The Army Air Forces had expected attrition, but they hadn't expected this kind of endurance. The fortresses weren't invulnerable. They fell, they burned, they vanished, but not without a price. For every fortress that didn't make it home, 4 or 5, sometimes 6 German fighters fell with it. The math was brutal, and it was winning the war. On November 3rd, over Wilhelmshaven, the 381st Bomb Group flew its 112th sortie. Weather was clear. The air was thin and cruel. The formation held steady at 24,000 feet. In Liberty's Bight, a B-17G, Staff Sergeant Earl Mason was adjusting his waist gun when the call came over the intercom. "Bandits 10 o'clock low." No panic, just the signal. Mason swung the .50 into position, buckled down, breath slow. He saw the fighters rise, black crosses glinting in the sun, and fired. 100 yards ahead, the tail gunner opened up, then the belly turret, the top turret, the right waist, the nose. Within seconds, 6 gunners on Liberty's Bight were firing at once. The fortress became a sphere of lead. Shell casings rained into the fuselage. Steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines. Mason didn't hear his own gun over the chorus of fire. The fighters broke off. One trailed smoke, another spun, the rest scattered. The formation didn't even slow down. Inside the command bunker in Kassel, a Luftwaffe analyst drew a new diagram on the chalkboard. "Here," he said, circling the flanks, "we estimate waist gunners can fire with 80% coverage. Belly turret gives vertical protection. Tail gun has dual .50s. Top turret overlaps with nose and flanks. There is no safe approach." An officer interrupted, "Not even from above." The analyst shook his head. "Top turrets elevate to 90 degrees, twin mounts. Even at a steep dive angle, the approach time before return fire is under 3 seconds. Another officer muttered, "And we're sending boys up there with single 20 cannons and hope." No one laughed. Back in the air, Sergeant Mason reloaded. His hands shook, not from fear but adrenaline. His fingertips were bleeding from brass burns. He looked around. The sky was empty again. They were past the danger zone. The mission would continue. That night, the Luftwaffe's chief of fighter tactics, Adolf Galland, reviewed his own records. He didn't trust bureaucracy, but he trusted numbers, and the numbers were clear. Engaging a fortress formation required 4 to 6 fighters per fortress for a single kill. A minimum of 4 passes to ensure destruction. Risk of 2-1 losses for every engagement. He wrote a single line in his log. "The American bomber is not an aircraft. It is a fortress of industry, gunnery, and steel." The next morning, the fortresses returned. They always did. By February of 1945, the sky over Germany had changed. It was no longer blue. It was gray, flat, distant. The clouds did not move, they waited, and beneath them the cities burned. Frankfurt, Dresden, Berlin, Wurzburg. Each week, another firestorm. Each morning, the low growl of propellers rising from England like a wave preparing to break. Every German child could identify the sound by then. Not the shrill whine of a Stuka, not the deep roar of a V2. No, this was something else. The rhythmic thunder of 4 engines per aircraft, multiplied by hundreds. And every aircraft carried 13.50 caliber machine guns. In a bunker beneath Berlin, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring stared at a map covered in red pins. Each one marked a bombing. He no longer shouted in meetings, no longer slammed fists. Now he just smoked slowly as the reports came in. Another squadron of B-17s. Another city flattened. Another Luftwaffe wing cut in half. He knew by then what they all knew. The war was no longer being fought in the air. The air had already been lost. At the Jagdschwader 27 airfield, the pilots didn't look each other in the eye anymore. The new recruits were getting younger, the aircraft fewer, fuel harder to come by. They still climbed into their 109s, still climbed toward the formations. But the moment they saw the fortresses, that wall of steel and spinning barrels, something in their chest turned to ice. You could not flank them. You could not surprise them. They fired in every direction. It was like flying into the teeth of a god. In the 100th Bomb Group, known as the Bloody 100th, the gunners no longer celebrated kills. They just counted the belts. 6 gunners per plane, 13.50 cals. On a single mission, a full squadron could go through 250,000 rounds before reaching the target. They cleaned their barrels with oily rags, checked links, slapped new ammo crates into place while blood still dried from the last mission. When the fighters came, there was no pause. It was like a hive awakening. One gun opened, then another, then all of them. The sky lit up like a welding torch. The fortress once again lived up to its name. Sergeant Buck Mallory was on his 10th mission when he saw a German pilot fly directly into the fire. No evasive roll, no dive, just a head-on charge. His belly turret caught the fighter's wing. The top turret finished the job. The Messerschmitt erupted into shrapnel 50 meters short of the lead bomber. Mallory flinched, not from the kill, but from the look on the pilot's face in the last moment. He hadn't been angry or screaming. He had been calm, resigned, as if he knew there was nothing left to do but die. That day, 113 fortresses returned to base. 6 did not. But the target was leveled. The mission was marked as a success. And the Germans had lost 48 fighters. In a small church basement in Wurzburg, Hauptmann Eugen Voss sat beside a candle, writing a letter he would never send. His squadron was gone. He had flown against the fortresses 3 times in the last month. He had survived. But each time it took more of him. It wasn't just fear, it was futility. He had fired every cannon round, banked and dived and weaved, but there were too many guns. Even when he hit them, they didn't stop. He wrote the words slowly, carefully. They are not aircraft. They are monuments of steel that float above our cities and rain death in waves. You do not shoot down a fortress. You survive it if you are lucky. He folded the letter, tucked it into his jacket, and stepped back into the night. Above him, the sky rumbled again. Captain Holloway's crew climbed toward Hamburg under cover of thick clouds. The flak was brutal. One burst toward the left rudder. A waist gunner was thrown back, helmet cracked open, dead before he hit the floor. But the fortress didn't fall. Gutierrez took over the gun. Daniels moved to patch the radio line with a length of chewing gum foil and copper wire. The ship rattled, groaned, threatened to break apart, and still they flew. Because if they turned back, the formation lost coverage. If one gun went silent, the box opened. And if the box opened, they all died. So they fired. Until their fingers bled. Until the barrels steamed. Until the Germans gave up. By March, the Luftwaffe was no longer a threat. They flew in ones and twos, volunteers, desperate men, teenagers. And the fortresses came anyway. Over Berlin, on March 22nd, 1,329 B-17s crossed the sky. That day, the air over Germany belonged entirely to them. A fleet of gunships, each one its own army. A sky filled with thunder. After the war, when the American gunners returned home, many of them threw their uniforms into trunks and tried to forget the noise. But the Germans could not forget. Former pilots, interrogated in Allied camps, repeated the same stories. You could not get near them. We lost 3 men for everyone we scratched. They never broke formation. They never stopped shooting. Even the aces said it, the ones who'd survived dozens of dogfights. It was the fortresses that had broken their will. The M1 Garand had dominated the ground. The Sherman had advanced across France. But the B-17 Flying Fortress had conquered the sky through mathematics and thunder. It was more than a bomber. It was an idea. A flying wall of fire. And it left its shape burned into the memory of every man who dared fly against it.